E3. Short for Electronic Entertainment Expo, which is a mouthful, so E3 it is. The big gaming event of the year, where we're reliably showcased games from a variety of studios under a plethora of publishers in the narrow time frame of a long weekend hosted live, with an in-person expo and broadcast around the world for people to witness each company's products showcased and demonstrated for all to see. It's not the only gaming-related press event going, but it certainly was the largest and most recognisable for the longest time. However, in recent years, E3 has gone from the reliable, unkillable Honda Jazz of games industry conventions to the Lancia Beta. I don't even know what that is, I just googled the most unreliable car of all time and that reliably came up, whereas the Honda Jazz is just god-tier motoring. Anyway, sadly, it appears as if E3, the biggest video game convention in the world, is unofficially, yet slowly but surely, rather certainly, dead. Like my granddad. And my nan actually, shit. Once again, E3 has been cancelled, formally announcing a few days ago that once again the event planned for June this year will no longer be going ahead this time, due to the event not garnering sustained interest necessary to do so. Basically, not only has the pandemic impacted E3's prospects by continuously fucking it in the rectum, but also studios have been pulling out and decreasing interest in people actually going has proven to be too much for E3 to be sustainable going forward, it would seem. And whilst I don't talk about news in the games industry very often, I'm actually quite out of the loop, and for the most part that's kind of the way I like it these days, I felt it would be wrong to not at least say something about this. Look, it's a shame. I always enjoyed the cozy feeling of a densely packed weekend of live streams, showcases, and a landslide of game news, even if the vast majority of games would never take my interest for more than 20 seconds, sometimes even less. There are too many carbon copies of the last game these days. However, despite this, I never had any intention of actually going to the physical event. I just enjoyed chilling in my room after a fulfilling day and engaging with the news as it came, and not the world and the people in it. Introversion, innit? So, it seems E3 is done, and I don't just mean the 2023 event, but the whole thing in general. Whilst this isn't exactly confirmed, I'd like to explain my reasoning. Let's begin with the general consensus. Everybody seems to think this. It's hardly an unpopular opinion. You don't even need to be watching this video. It's a complete and utter waste of your time. Why are you still here? For God's sake, let me out of the fucking basement. That wasn't even a part of the script, so now I've lost track. This calamity has been on the horizon for years, sadly. E3 going down the drain is not something that happens suddenly. E3 has suffered a very slow and painful death, going from the pinnacle of video game related expos in the world to a state where it's less likely to go ahead than it is likely at any given year. So this calamity began around 2019 with major companies, specifically Sony, pulling out and being like, look, we can do our own event. So Sony did. I'm simplifying, by the way. I don't even know what E3 is really. I'm here for the ride. Then in 2020... Fuck, is that COVID? Oh shit. So that one was cancelled for obvious reasons. There was a global pandemic on and the world had basically shut down. Society was hardly going to return to normal just to appease a demographic of people who barely leave their bedrooms. So yeah, that was shit, but you could say the same for the entirety of 2020. In 2021, E3 went ahead in a fully digital format, and it sucked fundamental goat penis. Judging by how poorly received E3 2021 was, the only chance for E3 to be saved was to return to its physical event nature. So in 2022 they just cancelled it due to further health concerns, with the pandemic's impact still felt. However, they confirmed that E3 would return to the Los Angeles Convention Center during the second week of June 2023. And this year, E3 2023 recently got confirmed as cancelled due to a lack of interest and attendance of major publishers. It seems as if one by one over the past few months, every publisher has come to realise that they simply don't need it anymore. Many companies who earlier had confirmed their presence at E3 2023 pulled out one by one and then opted to jump on Jeff Keighley's Summer Games Fest instead. Because look at him, he exists and he will not rest until everybody in the games industry fucking knows it. So it doesn't look good for E3 since it hasn't really been fully functional since 2019. and even then Sony wasn't present, and I remember that being big news at the time. However, we managed to hijack the starting soon page for the Bethesda E3 livestream with this infamous picture, and it was quite something.
Watch glitch compilation.
Ethan, look at the bottom. Ethan, look at the bottom.
Ethan, oh my god!
Ethan. Oh my god.
Oh my god.
That's amazing. Who did that?
Oh, it's gone. I think we might have taken it down immediately.
That's
I
so
think we might have
good.
taken it off immediately.
Sadly, companies were already starting to lose interest. Many were realising around this time they had the traction to strum up their own hype about their products without sinking stupid money into an expo hosted by a third party. And then going into 2020, the worst happened with the global pandemic causing the entire world to shut down. It was almost apocalyptic for a while. Here in the UK, we were fully locked down for months. Over in America, well, it was likely still America, so never mind. But you get the idea. An in-person event like E3 was never likely to take hold. Despite many companies being interested in participating, E3 was cancelled, paving the way for Jeff Keighley's Summer Game Fest, where every now and then he'd livestream something between May and August, showcasing shit like the Unreal Engine 5, and that was fine, but it's not an actual event really, and it didn't have the vibe, and it was hardly a substitute at that time. In 2021, E3 compromised with the digital event that sucked and branded it to the Electronic Entertainment Experience, and it featured many big companies, but it missed the snazz of an on-stage presentation and the prospect of being heckled. Then E3 2022 was cancelled both physically and online due to the ongoing concerns for the COVID-19 pandemic and the fact that their previous online event was a complete and utter flop. I don't really know how the online version was impacted really, but it likely wasn't as effective in marketing, so perhaps many companies weren't interested in investing in another online do. This struck true this year for certain with E3 2023, despite planning being well underway for a physical in-person event and online sort of stuff. It was cancelled due not to the pandemic and its fallout, but rather to a simple lack of interest and attendance of major publishers, with many big names pulling out. Microsoft went first, despite still planning a showcase prior to when E3 would have been. They announced they would also not attend the convention itself. Then Nintendo, Ubisoft, Sega and Tencent also withdrew their interests in the event. From here, a complete cancellation of E3 2023 was far from unexpected. In fact, it seemed inevitable. Without the big names, the event simply would not have had the pull to function. And Jeff Keighley had poached all the big names for his Summer Game Fest. He's coming. But the truth is, it seems many companies realised they didn't need this event to promote their new games, with some now hosting their own events, such as Sony or Ubisoft, which can easily be incorporated into a more broad thing like the Summer Game Fest than it would in E3's calendar, and probably doesn't cost them as much to be involved with. And then there's another issue. These days, many developers, many publishers simply don't have anything worth showing. To be fair, showing nothing is preferable to what Bethesda did one year, where the majority of their event was showcasing animations and community stuff whilst profusely apologising for Fallout 76's mere existence. But look, games now take a lot longer on average to develop. Games are also getting delayed more often than not these days. That in itself would have an impact on events like E3, as it seems far less companies actually have enough products that they can advertise to the scale an event like E3 might demand, so that likely didn't help either, but at this stage I'm just assuming. I know a lot of games are still releasing all the time, but my mind always blurs it into defining the industry by what actually looks different from the last game, and that, whilst this shouldn't be the case in my opinion, is becoming less common from my perspective, but that in itself is a very biased take, and I'll explain why. Most games that exist these days simply do not interest me, and therefore they do not exist. So with that being said, let's assume the vast majority of the problem was companies no longer having interest in participating in E3, and only slightly because many simply don't have a product to showcase at the moment. As for the attendance perspective of the public, I cannot comment as I've never been to an E3 event, but based on what I've heard from people who have attended in the past, the online component is the better experience due to A, how expensive the tickets are, and B, how unlikely you are to actually do anything but walk around the convention centre unless you want to queue up for literally hours on literally any demo open to the attending public. But it tracks because I went to EGX, a UK based gaming event one year. It's certainly not to the E3 scale, or at least I don't think it is, but there wasn't really an awful lot to actually do once you got onto the convention floor there besides from buy drugs from Pikachu and leave. So if EGX has that problem, or at least had that problem, I'm certain E3 did too. I won't equate these two events in any way, and it's not a knock to either, but I wanted to talk about Pikachu selling drugs. The truth is, it appears the industry has evolved or devolved past needing E3. It simply is no longer sustainable and makes no financial sense to go ahead with from the perspective of the publishers. Companies showing decreasing amounts of interest also means it's unlikely E3 could make a comeback unless it became some crazy indie convention, and as good as that would be, as indie games showcased at events like this have in the past been some of the most interesting parts of the whole affair, it's unlikely people will go out of their way to see the value of indie games en masse without the big names and the big products drawing eyes in first. Not that E3 was ever the place to showcase your indie game unless you were backed by a massive publisher. So look, you get the point. From here, I don't see a way up, and many seem to be in the same mindset. E3 has only confirmed it's cancelled once again this year, but I think the longer an event like this doesn't go ahead, the less likely it is to ever happen again. So my thought process is, E3 is dead. For better or worse, it simply cannot keep up with the industry. The pandemic proved that many publishers, big companies especially, can get by on promoting their games in their own events, and that leaves E3 with no value to their marketing campaigns as it wasn't flexible enough. So even with the pandemic no longer an issue, E3's use to the big names that kept it afloat is gone. Which is a shame in my opinion, but that's from the perspective of a casual viewer of these events. And I saw them as a nice time to immerse myself in the games industry, but hey, I won't waste energy anticipating some triumphant return. It's far from the only event in the games industry, and there are many others, but it's the one I'm most aware of, as it was certainly the biggest once upon a time. Many recognisable names and companies have crawled from the woodwork to mock it in wake of this announcement, and that's the best thing to come from this entire business in my opinion. So, will E3 ever bounce back from this? Whilst I don't think so personally, I'm not that clued up. It very well could if every company under the sun magically became interested in participating again somehow, but I just don't see that happening. Especially since for years now the decline for this event has been so obvious to all who paid attention. It's somewhat sad. I've always enjoyed watching E3 casually, but whatever. I also hear for a lot of people the death of this event won't necessarily be a bad thing either. So look on the bright side. If E3 never came back, at least the Bill Clinton kid cannot outdo us. He is Jeff's problem now, and we all know he'll be back. Thanks for watching. E3's funeral will be on Thursday. Bring piss.